Southern California rocked by a 5.1 magnitude quake as the region is battered by historic tropical storms.
Over the course of just 72 hours, the San Francisco Bay Area has been struck by not one, but two earthquakes of significant magnitude, leaving experts and residents both rattled and confused. From the bustling streets of San Francisco to the sleepy towns of Sacramento, the question on everyone's mind is, what exactly is causing this unusual surge in seismic activity, and what could it mean for the future of the state? Stick with us as we break down the science behind these tremors, explore the hidden danger beneath the surface, and reveal what might be coming next for California. Earthquakes rock the Bay Area. What's next? In just 72 hours, the Bay Area has been struck not once, but twice by earthquakes of magnitude 3.7. Sending shockwaves through the hearts of Californians who were already on edge after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. What seemed like an ordinary seismic event has now sparked more than a few concerned glances, as people from San Francisco to Sacramento are questioning if these back-to-back tremors are signaling a much larger, more dangerous shift beneath the Earth's surface. Are we witnessing the calm before the storm, or is this just another minor shakeup that won't amount to anything more? As uncertainty looms large, experts are scrambling to interpret the seismic data, trying to decipher whether this surge in activity is an anomaly or something far more ominous. It's no secret that California is a seismic hotbed, with the notorious San Andreas fault running through the state like a ticking time bomb. But the question on everyone's mind is, are these quakes connected, or are they simply random disturbances in the ground? Could the tremors be spreading pressure along various fault lines, including the San Andreas? While we've experienced earthquakes before, there's something different about the closeness of these events. Could they be connected to deeper shifts within the crust, signaling a bigger seismic event in the not-too-distant future? Is the Bay Area, one of the world's most populated regions, prepared for what could be a massive quake? Scientists suggest that the pressure along California's fault systems is growing stronger, making this a tense waiting game. Could this be the early warning that something far larger is brewing beneath our feet? The reality is that earthquakes don't often happen in isolation. Minor quakes can be the catalysts that release stress in other fault lines nearby, triggering further seismic activity. So, with two quakes in such close succession, is this the start of a seismic series, a foreshadowing of a bigger catastrophe? California's fault lines are interconnected, with every tremor potentially releasing pressure across vast stretches of land. The scientific community is watching closely, aware that California sits on the edge of a potential disaster. As experts examine the seismic data, there's growing tension, with the feeling that something far more significant could happen soon. Could this be the beginning of the feared big one, or will these earthquakes be remembered as a false alarm? The San Andreas fault, Haywood fault, and numerous other fault systems beneath the surface are constantly shifting and groaning, with each small tremor adding pressure that could eventually lead to a catastrophic rupture. The sheer unpredictability of earthquakes makes it nearly impossible to tell when the ground will finally break, but the patterns we've seen in the past suggest that we're well past due for a major event. And with so many populated cities built on or near fault lines, the risks are higher than ever before. The tension mounts with each new tremor, and as the days go on, residents and experts alike wonder, are we just experiencing the early stages of a larger earthquake? Or is the land shifting in ways that could change the very face of the Bay Area forever? Keep watching, because the answer could come sooner than you think. A ticking time bomb. Beneath the East Bay. Beneath the East Bay, a silent monster stirs. One that has long been ignored and yet holds the potential to shake California to its very core. The Haywood fault, a dormant but highly dangerous fault line, has remained quiet for decades, but the recent uptick in seismic activity is raising eyebrows. Could the two recent earthquakes be the first signs of a major rupture that could devastate one of the most populated regions of the state? Experts have warned for years that the Haywood fault is long overdue for a large earthquake, but the reality of such an event is far more chilling than the science behind it. If the fault were to rupture, entire cities like Oakland, Haywood, and Berkeley would face the brunt of the damage. Could these tremors simply be the early signs of what's to come? Or are we on the brink of witnessing a major seismic disaster? Unlike the famous San Andreas fault, which often takes the spotlight, the Haywood fault runs through densely populated areas and remains a hidden threat. While it's been relatively quiet for over a century, scientists have long warned that it is a ticking time bomb. Pressure has been building along the fault, and with each passing year, the risk of a significant earthquake increases. These recent quakes, though seemingly minor, could very well be signaling that the Haywood fault is finally starting to release some of that pressure. The tension is palpable, and with each tremor, the question becomes more pressing. How much longer can the region wait before the Haywood fault unleashes its devastating power? In the context of the Haywood fault, even a moderate earthquake could have catastrophic consequences. A magnitude 7.0 earthquake along this fault would bring widespread destruction, especially in cities like Oakland and Berkeley, where buildings and infrastructure are not designed to withstand such force. While scientists cannot predict the exact timing of a major earthquake, the increasing seismic activity in the region, coupled with the growing strain on the fault, suggests that the risk is higher than ever before. Could these recent tremors be a sign that the Haywood fault is finally ready to rupture? Or are they merely a temporary fluctuation in the region's seismic activity? As pressure builds, the stakes grow higher and the clock ticks louder. With millions of residents living in the direct line of the Haywood fault, the urgency of preparedness cannot be overstated. Even though the fault hasn't ruptured in over 150 years, the accumulated strain could be enormous. And as California's population continues to grow, more lives are at risk. The risk of a major earthquake on the Haywood fault is real, and it's looming larger than ever before. Could this be the wake-up call that the Bay Area needs to prepare for the inevitable? Or will we continue to live in a state of constant uncertainty, waiting for the other shoe to drop? With every quake, every tremor, the urgency becomes clearer. We may not have much time left to prepare for the worst-case scenario. The silent monster beneath our feet. While all eyes are often on California's fault lines, a far greater danger lies to the north, lurking beneath the Pacific Ocean. The Cascadia subduction zone is one of the most powerful fault systems on Earth, capable of producing earthquakes of up to 9.0 magnitude. Despite its dormant state for over 300 years, scientists are increasingly concerned about the potential for a massive rupture along this fault. Could the recent seismic activity in California be related to the mounting stress along the Cascadia subduction zone, with the entire Pacific Northwest vulnerable to an unprecedented megathrust earthquake? The stakes couldn't be higher. The timing could not be more critical. Will the Cascadia subduction zone remain silent, or is it gearing up for the most devastating earthquake in recorded history? The Cascadia subduction zone is different from the typical fault systems seen in California. It lies beneath the ocean, where the Pacific Plate and North American Plate are slowly grinding against each other. This fault is capable of unleashing a megathrust earthquake, one that could trigger tsunamis, widespread structural damage, and even more seismic activity in nearby regions. Historically, the Cascadia subduction zone has ruptured every 300 to 500 years, but it has now been over 320 years since its last significant rupture. With this length of dormancy, scientists are beginning to wonder, is the region overdue for a catastrophic event? Could the recent uptick in seismic activity along California's fault lines be a sign of pressure building along the Cascadia subduction zone, or is it merely coincidence? As the pressure in the Cascadia subduction zone continues to build, residents in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia remain on edge. The sheer force of a potential megathrust earthquake could send shockwaves across the Pacific Northwest, causing catastrophic destruction and loss of life. The big question is, how prepared are these regions for such an event? And are we nearing the tipping point where the entire fault could rupture, sending a massive earthquake and tsunami crashing toward the coast? As scientists track the rising seismic activity, the tension continues to mount. Every new tremor, every aftershock, could be a harbinger of what's to come. How much longer can the region hold its breath before the inevitable occurs? What makes the Cascadia subduction zone so frightening is the fact that it can affect an enormous area, stretching from Northern California all the way up to British Columbia. Unlike earthquakes along typical fault lines, a megathrust earthquake in this region would send shockwaves through entire states, triggering widespread destruction. What's more, the region's infrastructure is not built to withstand such a massive event. If the Cascadia subduction zone were to rupture, the resulting devastation would be felt for decades. The questions are piling up. Could this surge in seismic activity in California be the precursor to a greater seismic event? Could the Cascadia subduction zone be on the verge of awakening? And if so, what can we do to prepare? A giant, stirring in the shadows. While Northern California's recent quakes have made headlines, the real monster lurking in Southern California's shadows is the San Andreas Fault, a fault line that has been silently accumulating tension for over 300 years. Scientists have been warning for decades that the southern segment of the San Andreas Fault is overdue for a catastrophic earthquake, one that could rival any disaster in modern history. Could the recent uptick in seismic activity in Northern California be the early warning of a larger earthquake brewing in Southern California?
Where many people felt the brunt of that 5.1 magnitude earthquake and then those 22 plus aftershocks.
What would happen if the San Andreas Fault, stretching from Palm Springs to the Salton Sea, finally ruptured after more than 300 years of dormancy? The terrifying reality is that such an event would decimate much of Southern California, sending shockwaves through the entire region and beyond. What makes the San Andreas Fault so frightening is its sheer size and power. This fault has the potential to release an earthquake with a magnitude as high as 8.0, a force capable of causing widespread devastation. The last major rupture of this southern segment occurred over 300 years ago, and since then, the fault has been quietly accumulating strain. As each year passes, the pressure builds, and the question becomes, how much longer can it wait before releasing its energy? With the region's dense population and infrastructure, the potential damage from a major earthquake along this segment of the fault is unimaginable. Could the recent tremors in Northern California be related to the strain accumulating in the south? The tension is palpable, and experts are monitoring this fault more closely than ever. If the San Andreas Fault were to rupture, the impact would be catastrophic. Cities like Los Angeles, Riverside, and Palm Springs would experience ground shaking that could cause widespread damage to buildings, roads, and utilities. But the effects wouldn't stop there. The aftershocks could be felt throughout the entire western United States, and the destruction would ripple across the nation. The bigger question remains, how prepared are the people living in the San Andreas Fault Zone for such a massive event? With each passing tremor, the fear grows stronger that the big one could be right around the corner. Could these recent quakes be the signal that the San Andreas Fault is about to wake up? Or are we merely in for more unsettling aftershocks? Despite the long period of dormancy, the southern San Andreas Fault is not an anomaly. Over the past decade, scientists have been closely monitoring the increasing seismic activity along the fault, and many fear that we're nearing the point where the fault will release its pent-up energy. The implications of a rupture in this region are so vast that preparedness and resilience are now at the forefront of discussions. Could the recent uptick in tremors in Northern California be the start of a chain reaction that will extend southward, triggering the long-awaited rupture of the southern San Andreas Fault? As scientists study the data, they cannot ignore the mounting pressure. Every small tremor is one step closer to the big event, and the question is, when will it happen? What are we doing to prepare for the inevitable? The Walker Lane Fault Zone. While the focus of the seismic world is often on California, there is a growing threat just beyond the state's borders. Nevada's Walker Lane Fault Zone. Located just north of Las Vegas, this fault system has been showing signs of increased activity, and experts are beginning to worry about its potential to unleash a massive earthquake. In recent months, the frequency of seismic events in the region has been rising, with numerous tremors shaking the area and rattling residents who are used to the occasional quake. Could this uptick in activity be the first warning that the Walker Lane Fault Zone is reaching its breaking point? And if it ruptures, what will the impact be on Nevada, California, and beyond? The Walker Lane Fault Zone has always been considered a relatively quiet region in terms of seismic activity, but that's beginning to change. Recent patterns suggest that the fault system is under increasing strain, and some geologists believe the region could be primed for a significant earthquake in the near future. While the fault is not as well known as California's San Andreas or Haywood faults, its potential to cause destruction is just as significant. If the Walker Lane Fault were to rupture, it could send seismic waves throughout Nevada, California, and even parts of Arizona, triggering a chain reaction of quakes along nearby fault lines. Could these recent tremors be the opening salvo in a larger seismic event? Experts are now closely monitoring the region for signs of further escalation. One of the most concerning aspects of the Walker Lane Fault Zone is that it doesn't operate in isolation. The fault is part of a larger tectonic system that includes multiple fault lines stretching across the western United States. As pressure builds along the Walker Lane Fault, it could trigger a cascade of earthquakes along these interconnected fault lines, including the San Andreas Fault. Could the seismic activity in Nevada be the tipping point that sets off a massive earthquake in California? If the Walker Lane Fault were to rupture, it could trigger a chain of seismic events that would affect the entire western United States. The interconnected nature of these fault lines makes it nearly impossible to predict where the next big quake will strike. But the rising activity in Nevada is a stark reminder that we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Despite the increasing seismic activity in Nevada, the region remains relatively underprepared for a major earthquake. Many areas in Nevada, particularly around Las Vegas, are not built to withstand the type of destruction that a large earthquake could cause. If the Walker Lane Fault were to rupture, it would put millions of people at risk, particularly in areas that are not accustomed to the level of seismic activity experienced in California. The question now becomes, how much longer will Nevada remain a quiet zone in the world of seismic activity? As the frequency of earthquakes continues to rise, experts are calling for more attention to be paid to the Walker Lane Fault Zone, and for steps to be taken to prepare for the inevitable. A growing web of seismic risk. While California is undoubtedly the epicenter of seismic activity in the United States, it's not the only region where tectonic forces are at work. Across the country, fault lines are showing signs of increased activity, and experts are growing increasingly concerned about the interconnected web of seismic risk. From the Walker Lane Fault Zone in Nevada to the Cascadia subduction zone in the Pacific Northwest, seismic stress is building along fault lines that haven't seen major activity in years. What does this growing web of seismic risk mean for the future of the United States, and could it lead to more widespread destruction across the nation? Tectonic plates beneath the surface of the United States are constantly shifting, and seismic stress is building along a network of fault lines stretching from California to the Pacific Northwest and beyond. While California may be the most well-known hotspot, other regions are seeing an uptick in seismic activity as well. The Walker Lane Fault Zone in Nevada is just one example of an area that is experiencing increased pressure, and it's only a matter of time before that pressure is released. Similarly, the Cascadia subduction zone, which stretches from Northern California to British Columbia, has been showing signs of growing seismic stress. Could these areas be linked together, with one region's seismic activity potentially triggering a chain reaction in another? The possibilities are terrifying, and as the web of seismic risk grows, it becomes more difficult to predict where the next major earthquake will strike. The Cascadia subduction zone, in particular, is one of the most dangerous fault systems in North America. This fault is capable of producing a megathrust earthquake that could send shockwaves across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. But what happens when this fault interacts with other fault systems, like those in California or Nevada? Could the rising activity in Nevada and the ongoing seismic pressure in California be related to the Cascadia subduction zone's eventual rupture? As pressure mounts along all of these fault lines, the risk of a large-scale multi-fault earthquake increases. What does this mean for residents of the West Coast? And how can they prepare for the possibility of an event that could alter the course of history? As scientists monitor seismic activity across the United States, they're becoming more concerned about the growing web of tectonic stress. The idea of a large-scale, multi-fault earthquake that spans the entire western United States is no longer just a hypothetical scenario. It's a real and pressing threat. As the Walker Lane Fault Zone, the San Andreas Fault, and the Cascadia subduction zone continue to show signs of pressure, the risk of a massive earthquake that affects multiple regions is growing. Could we see a series of interconnected earthquakes that wreak havoc across the country? Or will these faults release their tension in smaller, more manageable events? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear: the tectonic forces at play are more connected than we realize, and the risk of widespread destruction is higher than ever. The West Coast's shifting tectonic landscape. The West Coast has a long history of seismic activity, from the infamous 1906 San Francisco earthquake to the more recent 1989 Loma Prieta quake. But history shows us that the seismic landscape of California and the Pacific Northwest is far from predictable. Could the recent uptick in seismic activity across the United States be a sign that the region is entering a new phase of heightened activity? Or are we simply experiencing another wave of periodic tremors? The reality is that seismic events on the West Coast are often surprising and unpredictable, and even the most experienced geologists have trouble predicting when the next big quake will strike. Historically, the West Coast has been home to some of the largest and most destructive earthquakes in the United States. Yet even with all the data we have collected over the years, scientists still struggle to predict when and where the next big earthquake will strike. Could the increasing frequency of tremors in California, Nevada, and beyond be a sign that the region is reaching a tipping point? Or are these simply coincidental events that will fade into the background? As seismic activity continues to rise, it's becoming clear that the risks are higher than we ever thought. What's coming next? And how can we prepare for an event that could alter the course of history? The unpredictability of seismic activity on the West Coast is one of the most terrifying aspects of living in the region. Despite decades of scientific research and monitoring, scientists have yet to figure out how to accurately predict when a large earthquake will strike. Could the recent uptick in activity be the prelude to something far more devastating, or are we simply seeing the natural ebb and flow of seismic pressure? The idea that we could be heading into a new phase of heightened seismic risk is a chilling thought, and one that should serve as a wake-up call for anyone living in the region. With the constant shifts in tectonic pressure, the next big earthquake could strike at any moment, and no one knows when it will happen. As history has shown us, the West Coast is no stranger to seismic surprises. From the catastrophic 1906 San Francisco earthquake to the relatively recent Loma Prieta quake, we know that the region is prone to sudden, violent earthquakes. So, when we see increasing seismic activity, it's hard not to wonder if this is the start of something far worse. The question is, what will the next earthquake look like? Will it be a series of small tremors, or will it be a massive event that shakes the region to its core? Only time will tell, but we must be prepared for whatever comes next. The tremor effect: how small quakes could set off a major catastrophe. Earthquakes may seem like isolated events, but seismic activity often occurs in waves. Small quakes, like the recent 3.7 magnitude tremors in the Bay Area, can actually be signs of something much larger brewing beneath the surface. These smaller earthquakes may be releasing pressure from the Earth's crust, but they could also be the trigger for much more significant seismic events. The question that looms over the Bay Area is whether these tremors are a mere precursor to something far more powerful. Could a bigger earthquake be just days or weeks away? Or are these minor shakes simply nature's way of relieving built-up pressure without catastrophic consequences? Studies have shown that minor earthquakes often occur in clusters. After a significant quake, stress in the Earth's crust can shift, affecting nearby fault lines. This can result in aftershocks or even new earthquakes. In fact, historical data reveals that some of the largest earthquakes in California's history were preceded by small quakes in the same region. So, could the tremors shaking San Francisco and its surrounding areas be signaling the beginning of a larger quake that has yet to hit? Experts warn that the frequency of aftershocks can increase significantly in the wake of major earthquakes. If the recent quakes are part of a larger seismic sequence, the region may soon face a much more intense event. The behavior of fault lines is complex, and even a small earthquake can dramatically affect the entire fault system. These smaller quakes might be releasing pressure, but they could also be setting off a chain reaction that makes the fault line more vulnerable. The Haywood fault, for example, which runs directly through the Bay Area, is notoriously prone to sudden movements after small shifts. Could these earthquakes be signaling the first cracks in the fault system, ready to break loose? The danger is that even if a significant quake doesn't come immediately, the shaking may continue for an extended period, heightening the risk of an eventual disaster. Furthermore, the idea of a trigger event isn't limited to California's most famous fault lines. Other faults in the Bay Area, such as the Calaveras and Concord faults, could also experience stress transfer from recent quakes, making them vulnerable to shifts. What makes this particularly alarming is that the region's densely populated areas, including Oakland, Berkeley, and San Jose, could face the full brunt of the aftermath. Could the Bay Area be looking at an escalating series of events leading to a larger, more dangerous earthquake? The uncertainty surrounding this seismic uptick raises more questions than answers. It's clear that the region must remain vigilant, as the possibility of a much larger earthquake is real. As the days pass, seismologists continue to monitor the ongoing tremors, trying to predict when and where the next big shake will hit. For residents, it's an unsettling waiting game. The combination of frequent minor quakes and mounting pressure beneath the surface suggests that the Bay Area is far from free from danger. Could the area soon experience a catastrophic rupture? Or is this merely a series of coincidental tremors that won't lead to a larger event? Only time will tell, but the stakes couldn't be higher. The Bay Area's residents and scientists alike must stay alert as the ground beneath them continues to shift. Could the big one be closer than we think? The big one, California's long-awaited catastrophic earthquake, is a phrase that has haunted residents for decades. Experts have been predicting a major rupture along the San Andreas fault for years, but with the recent uptick in seismic activity, it seems that the big one may be closer than we think. Could the recent earthquakes near San Francisco, combined with the heightened activity on the Haywood fault, signal that the big one is imminent? And if it does strike, how prepared are we to handle the devastation? Scientists have long warned that a major earthquake along the San Andreas fault could occur at any time. The fault, which stretches the length of California, is capable of producing an earthquake with a magnitude of 8.0 or higher, which would cause widespread destruction across the state. Recent seismic activity in California, particularly the series of recent quakes, has many experts wondering if we are finally seeing the beginning of the big one. Could these smaller earthquakes be part of the build-up to a larger, more catastrophic event? And if so, when will the big one hit? And what will its impact be? The San Andreas fault is known for its long, quiet periods, followed by sudden, catastrophic ruptures. The recent increase in seismic activity has added fuel to the fear that California is overdue for a major event. Could the recent tremors be signs that the San Andreas fault is becoming more active and ready to rupture? With millions of people living along the fault line, the potential impact of such an earthquake is unimaginable. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego could face widespread destruction, including collapsed buildings, disrupted transportation, and widespread power outages. The big one may not be a distant concern anymore. It may be just around the corner. The recent uptick in seismic activity isn't just a coincidence. Scientists have observed a clear pattern of increasing earthquake frequency and magnitude in California, particularly along the San Andreas fault. While experts can't predict exactly when the big one will strike, the likelihood of it happening in the near future is growing. California's infrastructure, which has been designed to withstand earthquakes, may still not be enough to protect residents in the event of a magnitude 8.0 earthquake. Are we ready for the big one, or will California be caught off guard when the fault finally ruptures? The question that lingers in the minds of all Californians is, when will the big one strike? Could these recent earthquakes be the first tremors of a much larger event? One thing is clear: the time to prepare for a major earthquake is now. The longer the San Andreas fault remains dormant, the larger the eventual rupture will be. The big one is coming. The question is when, and how prepared are we to face it? Stay informed, stay prepared, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates. The Earth is constantly shifting, and we'll be here to keep you in the loop. See you in the next one.